it's our very firm belief that in England we have a real opportunity to show the new government that shoots, game managers are operating to very high standards and are delivering significant net biodiversity gain, because that, I think, is the best way of securing our long-term future.
That long-term future, Jim, is it really under threat? There was no mention of shooting in the manifesto. There's no mention of shooting in the King's speech. Where's the danger here?
Well, I think the danger is the fact it wasn't in there. You started by saying this is a very boring subject. I don't think there's anything boring about wanting to make sure that my children and my grandsons, and little grandsons 8 and 9, are able to continue in the way of life that I've lived. And I don't think that's boring at all, because I think it's hugely, hugely important. And I think if you go out there and you speak to the people out there and say what matters to you most about the future, and it will be just what I've said. And that means that we have to be able to put forward all the incredible science that comes from GWCT and the work of Roger and his team of advisors that demonstrate that a well-run shoot is good for nature. It's as simple an argument. Yes, there's lots of stories underneath it about biodiversity net gain and about all the different species and things like that. But if you can just drum home that single message that a good, well-run shoot is beneficial for nature and that nature will be worse off if we stop shooting, then we're halfway to winning. The other point I'd make quickly, Charlie, is this. The fact that the government didn't put anything in their manifesto means that they are wide open to any suggestions. They've got a massive majority. I remember when I was in Parliament, the old saying was that when some young whippersnapper, it wasn't me, who stood up in Parliament and said something about the enemy over there, a wise old MP behind him tapped him on the shoulder and said, no, that's the opposition, the enemy are behind you. And that's exactly where the present government is going to find itself, with this massive majority. Sooner or later, and it's not going to be in the next month, 6 months, probably a year or two, this massive majority behind him are going to want to see something that they want to see. And that's what really worries me. They're going to start saying, we want to see some red meat alongside these difficult things that whether it's the two-child rule last week or all the other things that they're going to do, which is going to be difficult, and their party is going to insist, or the Prime Minister and his cabinet are going to insist on getting through Parliament and getting the loyalty of his backbenchers. Those backbenchers are going to want their pound of flesh. And the pound of flesh, if we're not careful, is us.
It is us, but I mean, in order at the moment, you can see for the manifesto, it's private schools, it's trail hunting, it's trophy imports, it might even be Israel, which didn't quite make it into the manifesto. Shooting seems to be a little bit further down the list, although I agree with you, it's on the list.
Well, I've no doubt it's on the list, because one of the things I found when I went into government as a minister in DEFRA nearly 15 years ago now, was that all the quangos and the NGOs, the RSPB and all the others that had an open door to DEFRA, I tried to close that door, because I said there are actually real people out there who know what they're talking about, that they should be involved in all the policy making. I fear that door is now wide open to all of those. And those organisations will be talking to civil, not just to ministers, but to civil servants about all their pet hobby horses and what they want to see done. And if we're not very careful, those are the things that the government will start to bring forward. And the only way, and I can't guarantee it'll be successful, the only way we can fend off those things is with very clear, logical and well-presented science. And that's why I stand here totally unapologetic. GWCT's science is beyond anybody else's, because the strength of ours is if the result of our science is inconvenient, we don't just bury it and hide it. We admit it and we advise what we can do to minimise the impact of it.
Yes, you put out some uncomfortable figures about invertebrates in the last couple of weeks, haven't you, Roger? What that didn't please all the shoots, did it?
So, I mean, what we've shown in the last few weeks, we've just published a really important piece of research. So it's essentially 50 years of insect monitoring data collected in the south of England, and it shows that over the last 40, 50 years, we've lost about 30-40% of our insects from our cereal fields. However, a lot of work that the GWCT has done over the last 25 to 30 years has been developing solutions to that problem. And many of those solutions, such as beetle banks, conservation headlands, wild bird seed mixers, they were all developed by GWCT scientists. They are now in the SFI scheme, a Sustainable Farming Incentive scheme. So well-funded options, backed by good science, they deliver for wildlife. So we have actually got the solutions to that problem.
Jim, is evidence going to be enough to sway this Labour government, or are they going to act emotionally?
Well, as I say, I can't guarantee that it will be enough, but my fervent belief is if we don't try, we've got only ourselves to blame. I mean, if the government come forward with something that's really what we see as negative to the countryside or to wildlife or to nature, but they do it because they've been asked to by their backbenchers or because of their prejudice, then the only argument we can put against them is clear science. And if we can demonstrate that if you do that, you're going to have this negative consequence, then at least we'll have put the argument across. I can't guarantee it'll win, but what I can guarantee is that if we don't even put it across, we've only ourselves to blame when we end up with something we don't like.
Now, right, go on, Roger.
Yeah, sorry, just to sort of add to Jim's point, I mean, we as scientists, we can collect data, publish that data, but actually what we really need is for all game managers, shoot operators, farmers to be collecting data themselves to show that they, on their ground, on their little piece of ground, they're doing good things for the environment as well.
And you can show how to do that.
Absolutely.
Is that on the GWCT website? Are there what you might call citizen science projects that people can take part in now?
Yeah, so it's like citizen science. We like to call it practitioner science because it's the next level up. It's data collected by professionals, people working on the ground. So we believe that data is high quality data, and we're about to launch a significant nationwide practitioner science programme.
Right, good. Now, look, we're here partly to talk about Gamebird release, which was a particular political flashpoint last year. What are you going to do by way of science, Roger, in that area?
So we've got a good body of 20 years worth of scientific evidence, looking at the impacts of Gamebird releasing and management, looking at both positive impacts, negative impacts. There are some research gaps that are currently being filled at the moment. In relation to the licensing issue that you refer to, DEFRA over the next 12 months will be consulting on that and coming forward with their approach post 2025. But looking more broadly, we've seen in Scotland we have a licensing scheme for grouse moors just come into effect. We may well have licensing across Wales next year for Gamebird releasing across the whole country. But in England, licensing across the wider landscape isn't on the agenda at the moment. So that's why, going back to my original point, we've got a real opportunity in England to demonstrate best practice, and we can help. But we need the help of all shoot managers as well to collect that data themselves on their own piece of ground to show so they can demonstrate that they're doing good work.
Jim, why did Gamebird release become such a flashpoint last year? Somebody said it was because Richard Benning was on holiday.
Bird flu is the short answer.
All right, so bird flu was the reason it was the official reason it started, but they did bring in the general license about bird flu from evidence from September 2022 in the middle of 2023 when they knew that problem had gone away, and yet we were all made to suffer. It looked like a revenge beating against shooting.
Well, I think you need to look back at what really happened, which was that Natural England, who of course is notionally in charge of the licensing, came forward to the government of the day and said, you've got no option but basically to say no to, you need individual licenses, but basically the criteria are going to be such that they're nearly all going to be turned down. And to her credit, the then Secretary of State realised that was not a wise approach and sought advice from us about what was a realistic level of risk to deal with bird flu, and as a result most of the applications for licenses were granted. But that's what created the furore about whether you should release, because we know that I can't keep on criticising one or individual organisation, but we know that some other organisations were advocating a complete ban on releasing game birds because of the unbelievably minute risk that they might spread bird flu, despite the fact there was absolutely no evidence that they would at all. As we all know, the vast majority of cases of bird flu, very sadly, were on seabirds and coastal areas. So there was no justification in that request. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State of the day realised she had to find a way through.
So that was a good example of GWCT in action. They said we're about to ban it. You said no, here's the science. And they said, okay, well, in that case, if we bring in this ban, we will allow the licensing, so it works. So I suppose, Roger, the idea is to try and improve the overall situation there, so that, let us say, there are people trying to produce a similar ban for another reason from within the conservation industry outside the GWCT. What can you do to stop that from happening?
Well, again, it comes back to having good evidence, and traditional scientific evidence can take years to generate and publish, which actually highlights the value of this, what we call practitioner evidence, because you can collect that data rapidly and use it to help inform policy. So that's why we're really keen over the next few months to get farmers, gamekeepers, shoot managers upskilled to the point where they can collect data using apps and submit that to GWCT so we can use that on their behalf.
Does the opposition do anything like this? I mean, they do their big garden bird counts, but that seems to be more like a PR exercise than anything else. Or do they pay their scientists to produce research?
Yeah, there's lots of really good examples of citizen science actually across a whole suite of taxa, and they're all generally really pretty good.
Our the farmland bird count, and I'm the first to admit that it was really a crib off the garden bird count, but we developed the farmland bird count, and that has been an incredible success. That is citizen science. That is practitioner science. It is individual farmers out on their land counting the different species of birds, and you can pick holes in individuals, but when you look at the mass, the trend, it is very difficult to argue against it. It is clearly there, and we're already now drawing very clear lessons from that.
We were talking earlier on about agriculture and about agricultural payments, and it seems that the government pays about £3.5 billion, and they get a peaceful countryside, and that used to go to landowners, and now goes to a split of landowners and conservation industry. They are very good at getting grants for what appear to be gamekeeping jobs. Why are we so bad at that?
I think probably because we haven't had a coordinated approach. What we have been sort of working towards over the last couple of years is helping farmers get better at accessing these big grants. They're getting groups of landowners working together. There's a group of farmers that were involved within the Peak District, the Peakland Environmental Farmers Group, big cooperative of farmers, and they're starting now to pull big grant applications together so that they can compete with the environmental NGOs for these big grants.
Jim, what do you think? Do you think they're just better at it, or have we been slow to get onto? I mean, it is a bandwagon to a degree, but have we been slow to get onto this?
No, I think that farmers are small C conservative people. The vast majority, they don't like change. They have resisted all the changes that have taken place over the last 15, 20 years since we moved away from the intervention system to acreage and hectareage payments, and now the resistance into move to sustainable farm initiative. I have to say that I mean, we can all pick holes in the schemes, but I do think the SFI scheme has, as Roger was implying, the opportunity to allow farmers to do what they've often they used to challenge me about, and they still do, which is when they say, do you want us to produce food or birds? There isn't a choice. You've got to do both. And the work that we in GWCT have done, and now using SFI, you can farm the best of your land and produce food as commercially and economically as is possible in today's market. But on the periphery, around the edges, the little bits you don't like, 5-10% of your land, put it into SFI. It might be more than that if you've got some poor land. Put it into SFI, and you will gain financially, but you'll also have this much, much better panoply of wildlife around you, which I think most country people want to see.
I think that is extremely good advice. I was thinking more about 20 years ago. The GWCT was the BAP, the Biodiversity Action Plan lead on the grey partridge. I'm not quite sure what's happened to BAPS since then. But could you become an enabling organisation for people to put in a plan to save the curlew? I mean, the RSPB and some other organisations have nailed £5 million to, well, so far kill off all the curlew in Lake Vyrnwy. You know, £15 million to so far kill off most of the capercaillie in the Abernethy area. Why aren't we getting that money?
Well, Charlie, we're trying, and we hope that we're going to get much better at it over the coming years as we start to work with these big groups of farms. But I mean, I do sense, though, that there is a gathering consensus around some really important issues. So 20 years ago, GWCT, we were a lone voice amongst conservation organisations advocating for predation management, predation control alongside habitat options to aid species recovery. There's a broader consensus now that actually predation pressure is important and that we need to relieve that. So and we are the organisation that are expert in that. So I would hope that we can start to get involved with collaborative projects with some good funding.
If we encourage farmers, landowners, shoot captains to do all that they can to encourage and develop wildlife on their farms, whether it's for shooting or not, but obviously we're predominantly talking about shooting here today, we are primarily talking about private money. Yes, there's a bit of SFI government money, but who knows how long that will last, and given the pressures on public finances, it's questionable. Shooting money is all private money. What you've just described, all the money the RSPB have had at Lake Vyrnwy, you know, they've had over £1 million to bring back the black grouse when the things were there when they took them over and they got rid of them in the first place. You know, they've had all this, and it's public money, it's taxpayers' money. And if we really want to see the countryside flourish, we cannot expect the taxpayer to constantly foot the bill. And so many of these schemes, even rewilding, is all based on taxpayers' money. What we need to understand is the role of private money, which is generated by the people who come and want to enjoy the countryside. Yes, there are those who will say you shouldn't be shooting things, you shouldn't be killing things, and all those things. But if we can keep on drumming home the message that if you abandon it, the downside is far worse, and it will be, the demand will be for public money, which will never be sufficient. If we can concentrate on these issues, then we have a chance.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Roger.